the ultimate tribute that you can pay yourself in terms of knowledge gathering is how you gather knowledge from the people you meet. So more often than not, you have to be in listening mode. I've been blessed that.
What do you think about this entire concept of marketing a book when an author as a marketer of the brand?
I think there's no problem. I mean, a lot of people ask me, was it the pandemic that has recalibrated or restarted the concept of reading? And I've always said no. People may read more during a pandemic, but they don't start reading because of a pandemic. If you don't read Pawan Verma's Being Indian or the Great Indian Middle Class, you won't understand the dynamics of why Indians spend the way they do and what is the behavioral science behind the Indian middle class. We need to re-emphasize poetry in our lives today. That is missing. You'll be shocked. Other than Rupa, I don't think there is any publisher in India today who's even publishing poetry. We are not encouraging young people. The tragedy is, many years ago, Nehruji started, I think, this Shankar's contest on art. You remember where people could do cartoons and all that? We've shut down that. जो अहमियत आप दोगे पोएट्री को ना, that is important. आज पोएट्री को कवियों की इतनी, there's no recognition.
We have with us Mr. Suhel Seth. Mr. Seth doesn't need an introduction per se. He is a marketing mogul. He is author of several bestseller books. Go to the top, the target in your face, get to the top, the 10 rules for success. And Mr. Seth has been working, he has been writing several columns for several newspapers and publication houses in India. And today we have with us. Thank you, Mr. Seth, for joining us for this session.
Thank you.
To begin with, I would like to begin this session with your journey as your career in public relations. You have redefined the entire concept of public relations in India. How did this journey happen?
Well, I wish it was public relations, but actually it's marketing. And many people confuse public relations for marketing, which I've never understood why, especially in our country. But sadly, given the way I speak and the manner in which I'm blunt, I would be a public relations disaster. So the marketing journey started in a very interesting way. I was born and raised in Calcutta, which I still believe is the most civilized city in India. And for us, it was very essential to have a lot of debate, a lot of encouraging dissent without it, snowballing into some kind of controversy. And obviously, one was surrounded by books. In those days, I think you people were either not born or were far too young. We didn't have the advantages of technology like you do today. So we grew up at a time when you respected knowledge, where you embellished yourself with as much as you could glean from what was available. You laid a lot of emphasis on things like books, on reading, on discussions, in debates, in theater. So that was the background in which one was born and raised. And over time, I pursued English literature for my graduation and for my postgrad. And I discovered that I didn't need an MBA because I learned more about consumer behavior from William Shakespeare's plays than I could have through a formal MBA. I learned more about life in India through Premchand's eyes than I could have by, just traversing the corridors of a management institute. And after that, I joined advertising under a formidable man called Ram Ray, who sadly left us last year. Ram was the founder of Response, which was a cutting-edge advertising agency. And Ram took me under his wings in the sense that I traversed the entire path, the entire journey of advertising through him. And he was one of the finest finest lateral thinkers without any linear bone in his body. And, you also had at that time Edward de Bono's books, the rush of books coming out, whether it was Six Thinking Hats or so on. So you imbued and you imbibed a sense of lateral thought, which otherwise was not available to you. And then I continued with advertising, then left in 1993 to join ITC's financial services business in order to get a grasp of what was happening, and then launched uh, the ITC Peregrine Fund in India. Peregrine was this Tony storied firm out of Hong Kong, founded by Philip Toes, who was Li Ka-shing's right hand man. Li Ka-shing, as you know, was the creator of the Hutch Group and all of that. Then my brother and I, Swapan, we started our own agency called Equus, and we sold 30% to Martin Sorrell. It was Martin Sorrell's first direct investment in India through WPP. And then in 2006, I returned to where I finally belonged, which was a marketing consultancy. But alongside, I have kept up my passion for reading, for writing, for public speaking, uh, for engaging with young minds, because I believe the ultimate tribute that you can pay yourself in terms of knowledge gathering is how you gather knowledge from the people you meet. So, more often than not, you have to be in listening mode. I've been blessed that I worked both in theater, in films, even within the debating world with formidable minds. So, one was born in an environment and then one grew up in an environment which was very encouraging. It was very positive. There wasn't any of the toxicity that you see today. There wasn't any of the disagreeable nature of behavior that you see today. So it was all very good and remains good.
You have said one thing very interesting, that things were very different then. They were not so, I would like to use the word, not so toxic and negative at that time. People were taking it in a positive light. If you talk about, marketing as a concept, it was just a concept for brands and, for big names at that time. Currently, when we see, especially in literature, we have seen the concept of marketing sneaking into and making a way for it. Initially, it was only publishers who were taking, help of big, brands, and they were taking help from big companies and hiring them as image consultancy for the image consultancy, for marketing, for advertising, for PR. But recently, in last few years, we have seen a trend where authors have taken charge of being a marketer as well. Like, what I would like to know from you, that how much an author, when we bring the same concept to literature or books, how much an author plays a role in actively marketing their book, because it's not enough to just write a good book and get a good publishers. The major part of it is also that you need to find your audience out there, for which not only publishers are responsible, but I
So,
personally believe as an author.
what's your
Huh?
question?
My question here is that what do you think about this entire concept of marketing a book when and an author as a marketer of the brand?
I think there's no problem. I mean, Satyajit Ray didn't have to market his trilogy. Pathir Panchali was a great film. Nayak was a great film. Mrinal Sen didn't have to market Ek Din Achanak or the films that he produced. I think with changing times, with greater clutter, with people having less attention span, you need clutter breaking devices. And marketing is one of those which allows you to interrupt that clutter and place your product or your brand or what you want to say in front of audiences. I mean, look at cinema, for instance, today. If you look at the Hindi film industry, you see that film industry actually spend a lot of money marketing. Whether there are OTT platforms, be it a Netflix or an Amazon or a Hotstar, they're all marketing. See, the difference, Swati, is that we are living in different times. Consumers adapt to the times they live in. More importantly, brands adapt to those consumers given the challenges of that time. So I have no issues, and I think there are wonderful authors who are marketing it. But would a Naipaul have marketed his book in the same way? Perhaps not. Would a Paul Theroux market his books or a Pico Iyer in the same way even today? Perhaps not. So it all depends. But having said that, I don't find it to be a discouraging sign for two reasons. Essentially, marketing is about creating benefits for the consumer. You don't buy surf, you buy the whitest wash. So if I can tell you that I have a compelling book, now, for instance, my good friend Amish Tripathi has just finished a book, Suhel Dev, sadly not named after me, but still Suhel Dev. And, you know, he's done a fabulous job, not only of marketing it, but even of packaging it. You know, there were many of us who were privileged to receive advanced copies or preview copies. And I think if through this whole process of marketing, you achieve two things, which is you engender greater scholarship through reading, and you get people to know what you're writing about and why it is a compelling read, more the merrier. It's good for reading, it's good for the publishing industry. Because see, in the good old days, you had 2 to 3 publishers. Today, you have as many publishers as you have functioning traffic lights in India. Every guy and his mother has become a publisher. So when you have so many publishers, when you have so many authors, I mean, today everyone is writing, which, by the way, is a great thing. I'm not, you know, by any means discouraging that aspect. People are writing good books, people are writing not so good books, but people are writing. And I think it's important for us as a country to go back to the mind being held high without fear. You know, the polymath genius of a Rabindranath Tagore can never be replicated. But what is the harm if people can replicate certain elements of just that scholarship or the strain of that scholarship? So I think it's good. Politicians are writing more books than they've ever written. More books are being written about politicians than they were ever written. You're seeing more business books, you're seeing more biographies. The world is actually getting back to reading in a big way. You know, a lot of people ask me, was it the pandemic that has recalibrated or restarted the concept of reading? And I've always said no. People may read more during a pandemic, but they don't start reading because of a pandemic. Because if that was the case, then there'd be a problem. Because then my worry would be, if the pandemic is over, would they stop reading? See, I've always said, Swati, in job interviews that I've conducted for, you know, various companies, I've always asked them one question. And that one question has been common. Which is the last book you've read? And I don't care what you read, whether it's James Hadley Chase, or whether it's Euripides, or whether it's, you know, P.G. Wodehouse, doesn't matter. Whether it's Walter Isaacson, because you're fond of biographies, doesn't matter. What matters is the gravitas, the seriousness, and the commitment you bring to scholarship. Ultimately, Swati, we will lose everything we have or gain the world. But what we will never lose is the scholarship that we have attained. And the tragedy with us in India is, because of various governmental policies, we continue to tinker with education syllabi in such a manner that we got rid of certain landmark uh, books, landmark authors, landmark playwrights. You know, when we were growing up in Calcutta, I had the privilege, the fortune of doing theater with the likes of Badal Sarkar. Now, where would you get that? Now, the tragedy is everyone is so busy with their goddamn smartphones. Everyone is so busy, you know, impressing the next Johnny. Everyone is so busy doing their own little things. So it's not as if the world has changed. We've changed. And therefore, when we as human beings change, adaptability and accessibility become the twin pillars on which you will then garner the kind of support, reach, consumer behavior, consumerism that you're looking out for.
You have actually answered my next question already, up to an extent. My next question was going to be, do you think as many as people who are writing, do we have enough readers in this country for those books?
Of
So,
course. Of course, we have enough readers. I mean, no publisher is going out of business. There are more and more publishers starting with every passing day. More and more genres are being created. Earlier, you didn't have as many publications in India on art history, for instance. You didn't have history books being written with the speed and the propensity with which they're being written today. Whether it's a William Dalrymple or a Ramchandra Guha, Romila Thapa continues to. So I'm saying it's not as if people are writing less. Now people only write so that there are readers. Now if readers had vanished, people wouldn't write, and businesses would be, out on the floor. But we're not
But
seeing any
do
publishers go bankrupt.
no, but do you think that the writers who are writing these days, for example, you have said yourself that now we have more books written by like written about politicians compared to about politicians. The entire paradigm has shifted towards more towards the political and religious books compared to there were like plethora of books that we used to read. Would you still section those books as a part of a literature that we would like to treasure as a country?
I'm not the judge, neither are you. You cannot decide what I must read. I cannot decide what you need to write. So I think it's a pernicious and silly argument to make that, oh, how would you classify this or that? We have no business. If people want to know, and let's say a Rajdeep has written a book on Modi, his wife Shagarika has written one on Indira Gandhi, fine. And I think the more the books, the better we are. Because books effectively are chroniclers of time. They're chroniclers of the passage of time. I mean, you and I won't be alive forever. So how will we pass on not only the wisdom, but more importantly, especially in books that are of historical value, how will you pass on the chronology of time to successive generations if you don't capture them in some form or the other? Which is why books and cinema are timeless, because they allow you to delve into the past and contextualize. Ultimately, everything is about context. And
We
whether
have
it is
talking.
whether it is history. I mean, I don't know if you've read William Shakespeare. Have you read a lot of Shakespeare? What have
I
you read?
love you, but Othello, I guess. No,
No, Othello, I guess, or Othello.
Othello. That's the only book I could think of. Othello.
Well, it's not a book, it's a play, but let's proceed on that. If you go back to William Shakespeare's times, and Shakespeare's plays were actually, all his political plays were an indictment of Elizabeth I's reign. When Mr. Kuldeep Nair, who sadly again passed away last year, when Mr. Nair wrote about his emergency years, he gave us an insight into what happened during the emergency between 1975 and 1977. Now, a lot of you people weren't even born then. How would you know how Indira Gandhi stifled the freedom of speech that was so valuable to a country like us and that remains valuable to a country like us? If that book hadn't been written, you wouldn't have had an idea. If you hadn't read Satish Jacob and Mark Tully's book on Amritsar, Mrs. Gandhi's last battle, you wouldn't have a clue of what happened with Operation Blue Star. If you don't read Pawan Verma's Being Indian or The Great Indian Middle Class, you won't understand the dynamics of why Indians spend the way they do and what is the behavioral science behind the Indian middle class. So I'm saying each book is very important depending on how you and I absorb it. Now, it's not very important for you to have read every play of Shakespeare. It's not important because you may have different interests. I may have different interests. But the point I'm making, Swati, is that we are losing our ability to appreciate dissent when we stop the advance of scholarship through books. You will not appreciate satire and humor if you can't contextualize it with P.G. Wodehouse. You cannot understand the genre of short story writing if you haven't read D.H. Lawrence or James Thurber. Now, a lot of people, only when the film The Secret Life of Walter Mitty came out, understood what Walter Mitty was about, but it was a fabulous story. So I'm saying in all of these, and there are some outstanding books that have been written by Indians for generations. Warren Buffett and Bill Gates today are venerated as these doyens of giving back, of philanthropy. But Manu, in Manu Smriti, almost 3,800 years ago, talks about Dan. And what I'm worried about, Swati, is that with successive generations relying more on what I call contemporary behavior and contemporary knowledge, will not even have an idea of what our legacy is. If you haven't read Sri Aurobindo's writings, if you haven't read what Jiddu Krishnamurti has said or written, if you haven't read all of that, then obviously the knowledge is a bit weak. But my belief is that, yes, Swati has interests A, D, and F. By all means, I must encourage the Swati of today to also understand the context of where she is and why she is where she is. Now, you have done remarkable work with literature festivals, whether it's in Noida or in Shimla. Now, a lot of people don't understand that Shimla has been the subject of many, many books. Books which had to do with the colonial Raj, books which had to do with contemporary India, books which had to do with the freedom struggle. So, you more than anyone else will know and appreciate that today, for instance, the entire tourism spur of the Lake District in England was made relevant by William Wordsworth and his seminal work called Daffodils. Now, if and you see this today, or like Pico Iyer, who's written remarkable books around places, including one of the most remarkable ever on Tibet. So it's important for me, therefore, to emphasize, Swati, that we are living in good times. We need to encourage our young to read more. We need to encourage our young to read everything. I mean, you can read a magazine, you can read a journal, you can read a short format, you can read a long format. The other point that I want to make, and I'm sorry taking so long to answer this question. The other point I want to make is we need to re-emphasize poetry in our lives today. That is missing. You know, we are actually missing the worldview. Okay, we have brilliant people, and sadly Rahatji passed away 2 days ago, but we still have brilliant thinkers like Gulzar Saab. But we need the Sahir Ludhianvis to return in some form or the other. You know, dissidence was actually snuffed out by Pandit Nehru when Sahir Ludhianvi wrote what he did in the 50s. You and I need to revisit for the young of today the seminal contribution of an Abraham Al-Qazi or a Habib Tanvir, or why the IPTA movement was begun. So I'm saying a lot of this will only be possible if we encourage people to read rather than encourage people only to be on a rich list. I would urge the media to create a knowledge list where we actually applaud thinkers rather than just wealthy people.
True that. True that. I totally agree with that. When you talk about poetry, like we are still in search of someone like Amrita Pritam. A lot of people of my age and even a generations after me, they have no idea about it. And because we do not talk much about it, like the platforms like Kavishala, suddenly we see a surge of people who are talking about poetry, retweeting it. It's more of a Twitter craze as of now. But when you talk about on ground, I would like to know from you, are we still in search of good poets? Have we have enough poets? Have we explored enough in the field? Are we doing enough to bring such poets like at the forefront and represent their work to create that nostalgia which was created by Sahil Ludhianvi and people like Amrita Pritam?
I agree with you, and I don't think we're doing enough. In fact, you'll be shocked. Other than Rupa, I don't think there is any publisher in India today who's even publishing poetry. I mean, you can have, self-publication and all that kind of stuff. You may have one or two publishers, but in terms of the mainstream publishers, no. And it's such a sad commentary on our lives. Where will you get the deepest understanding of human frailty, of human psychology, of weathering human storms if not through poetry, if not through theater. You had brilliant playwrights in India. You had brilliant playwrights. And in fact, once in one of my speeches, I said, the tragedy is India only knows one Tendulkar, Sachin. But there was a better, bigger Tendulkar in theater, Vijay Tendulkar. If you even now look at one of his plays, Silence, the Court is in Session, brilliant. Look at the plays of Mahesh Dattani, who started writing plays in English, brilliant. So we have this wherewithal. And you're right, it's not being marketed. At the literature festivals, it's the usual suspects who show up. We're not encouraging young people. The tragedy is, many years ago, Nehruji started, I think, this Shankar's contest on art. You remember, where people could do cartoons and all that? We've shut down that. I instituted in Kushwant Singh's memory a poetry award where I was giving from my side of 1 lakh or 2 lakhs, I can't remember. G. Thayil, all of them were. We could only have one award because there weren't enough entries and there wasn't enough support. I genuinely believe that Mr. Modi, as Prime Minister, has done a remarkable thing through the national education policy last week. It would be even more encouraging if, alongside the national education policy, we had some kind of a national contest in all our languages, which encourages writing, which encourages plays, writing of plays, writing of poetry, writing of prose. We have so many Jane Austens, we have so many Shakespeares, perhaps, lying around. Look at what Kundan Shah did with Janabi Do Yaro Ka script. I mean, that was marvelous writing. But what has happened is we have become so consumed by the advance of consumerism and, in a rush to do things, we've forgotten to enjoy the salubrious calmness of changing the pages of a book. The smell of that parchment paper, that is missing from our lives. We can smell butter chicken and, all of that rubbish with great adroitness, but we miss that, and we've allowed ourselves to miss that.
I would like to know, while we are talking about poetry, I have seen personally at my Lit Fest and other Lit Fest that I have visited, that whenever we do a session for poetry, we see, especially personally, I've seen that maximum number of huge audience for poetry sessions. But unfortunately, when we ask, I go and search for more poets to bring to the festival or to bring to the talks like this, I don't find enough of them. So, to solve that problem, I would like to know from you what our publishers can do to bring that talent at the forefront, so that the people like us, who are the good consumer or fan of poetry, who understand that the art of knowing more from lesser words, can find that sort of gem somewhere lying around, not lying around, but yes, shining on the shelves of the bookstores.
Ignore the middleman, which is the publisher. Imagine if you were to put out on Twitter that the Shimla Literature Festival is looking for the next Dinkar or the next Gulzar. Send us your entries on how do the hills beckon the Indian of today. Let the entries come. Let the entries be judged by a Gulzar Saab, by a Pavan Verma, by whoever. Yeah. Invite that person to be in conversation with Gulzar Saab. जो अहमियत आप दोगे पोएट्री को ना, that is important. आज पोएट्री को कवियों की इतनी, there's no recognition. They have been relegated either to entertainers or to people who are remembered when they pass away. If you go back 2 days before and see how much has been written on Rahat Indori Saab on Twitter, wasn't there during his lifetime.
True.
And I'm telling you, Swati, and I'm saying this sounding almost stupidly passionate, the power of the pen lies the most in plays and poetry. prose is somewhat dead. And that's my problem. Because plays allow for you and me to experience human dynamism through words. Poetry allows me to travel within the mind of that poet and also look at the underlying messages. किसी के बाप का तो नहीं है हिंदुस्तान. The underlying message is not about any political ideology or dispensation. The underlying message is about democracy and equality. कहाँ गए वो लोग? When Sahil Ludhianvi asks कि कहाँ थे वो कूचों में in प्यासा. What he's talking about is the promises that were made to the people of India at the stroke of midnight in 1947 in August 14, as we are on today, have been met. So, अगर आप इन चीजों की अहमियत और इन चीजों को आप कदर नहीं करेंगी, इनको you won't respect them, you will lose a lot of the genuine flavor of life. I've always told young people, I still die to do plays. If I'm offered a film versus a play, I will do a play any day. Because that allows, see, in a film, the camera does 80% of the work. In theater, you have to do all the 100%. You have to understand the nuances. You have to understand what is going on. You will never be able to replicate in prose the pain that Shylock goes through after he's forcibly baptized in The Merchant of Venice, or the anguish of a King Lear. So I'm saying it's very important, Swati, for us to create that. And I would urge you, because you've been doing this as a pioneer, that make your Shimla Theatre Literature Festival actually come alive. Now, normally what happens in all these festivals is there is a discussion between person A and person B. But I'm saying take it to a different level. Have enactments. So if you're having a discussion on Shakespeare, have someone actually read out. Now remember, George Bernard Shaw, another formidable playwright, his prefaces were always longer than his plays. You know why? Because he wanted to explain the context. Whether it's Arms and the Man, whether it's Pygmalion. शेक्सपियर को पढ़ने के लिए आपको प्लूटार्क्स लाइव्स पढ़नी पड़ेगी, which is what Shakespeare absorbed from, where he understood characters from. We, and you more than me, must also encourage more and more people to translate great works. There is so much of wealth in our Urdu work, in Urdu literature, which hasn't been translated. Bibek Devroy is doing phenomenal work by translating the scriptures, some of the classics. Ye sab aap karo na. Narayan Murthy of Infosys, his son, Rohan, is doing a fabulous job with revisiting the Indian classics and translating them, making them available. So this is the heritage that must speak to us. This is the heritage that we need to cherish. Mandir masjid to banti jayengi, पर इंसानियत कब बनेगी? तो वो इंसानियत को बनाने के लिए आपको इंसान चाहिए, और इंसान तभी होता है जब उसमें पढ़ने की और पढ़ाने की रुचि हो. अगर पढ़ने या पढ़ाने की रुचि नहीं हो तो फिर वो इंसान क्या?
Words make the man. It was nice talking to you. I'm getting the cue that we have to wrap up now. Sadly, I would like to speak more to you about this, but now we have to wrap up this session. And thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for all the good words you have, all the guidance you have given me through this session as well. I'll keep it at the center of things when I'll do anything next time. Thank you so much for joining us. And
thank you to the Kavishala folks.
Thank you, Kavishala, for having us. Thank you so much.